Well, welcome again as we continue on
back.
with our survey, a study of the book of Genesis. Learning a lot of interesting things in here.
And
Things
Jacob
that,
and Esau.
Right, we've come
Meet
to
up
that
again.
place where they meet again.
Yeah.
Joseph or Jacob. Jacob had just gotten through dealing with Laban, who was not too happy with him, his father-in-law.
Yeah.
He's weathered that situation. Now he's facing his
having a
brother
time.
Esau.
Yeah.
And you remember how they parted, right?
Yes. And not on very good terms.
Not on very good terms. In fact, Esau had promised to kill his brother.
Yes.
So he's still not sure how things are going to go here. And Esau's coming not by himself, but with an army of several hundred people.
And this is what, Joe, about 20 years later?
Yeah, 20 years later. He worked 14 years for Jacob, worked 14 years for his two wives, Leah and Rachel, and then for about another 6 years afterwards to build up his herds. But now, 20 years later, Jacob's not sure how long Esau can hold a grudge. And like I said, he's not coming by himself, he's coming with 400 men.
Yeah.
And so he's not totally convinced yet that this is going to be a friendly meeting, even though God has given him reassurances
That's
that
right.
he's going to build a great nation through him. But Jacob's still a little shaky. You know, how often are we that way, you know, even though God has given us promise after promise, and yet when we face a difficult situation, we're a little bit fearful, you know, is this going to turn out right or not? And so Jacob's even goes to the point of dividing up his household. He divides it into 4 different groups, or at least 3 different groups. It puts the servants and their children first. And when I say servants, they were like his servant wives, concubines, whatever you want to call them, that he has children with.
Yeah.
Then he puts Leah and her children, and finally in the very back he puts Rachel and Joseph, who's, you know, the wife he really loves, and the son, of course, that he really loves, as we're going to find out more here pretty quick. But again, Jacob showing his favoritism. We see this all through the book of Genesis, with people showing favoritism, and it never leads to good things.
No.
But anyway,
things haven't changed much today.
No, unfortunately not.
We're people. We do that.
And anyway, I'm assuming he's thinking, you know, if Esau does attack him, why maybe, you know, he can get away with Rachel and Joseph, you know, if while he's busy attacking the other groups. But anyway, Jacob does go out in front. He's brave enough. He takes the lead. He goes out in front and he bows himself. He humbles himself before Esau.
Which is a smart thing to do.
Yeah, he doesn't go acting arrogantly or, you know, putting his or reminding Esau of his position, the fact that he's, you know, he's the one that has the family blessing, he's the one that has the birthright and so forth, but he comes before him humbly.
And look at all I've got.
And anyway, you can imagine Jacob's great relief when Esau embraces him instead of pulls out a knife and tries to kill him. Says he embraces him and he gives him a kiss. So apparently he's gotten over his hostilities. He's figured, you know, this is my brother. He did some stupid things, but hey, you know, I got 3 brothers and I did some stupid things with them sometimes, and they still love me. So I'm glad that we can outlive those hostilities and that unforgiveness. So anyway, Esau sees all these children and women and children, and he says, "Who are these? You know, what is all these people that you have with us?" And of course, Jacob introduces him. These are my 2 wives, and these are my 2 concubines, and these 11 kids. Well, it's actually more than 11 because there was at least 1 daughter. There's at least 12 now, and there may have been other daughters. They don't list all the daughters. You know, I know you women get shortchanged all the time, even today. But back then, especially, they don't even hardly talk about the girls,
No,
just
they
the
don't.
sons. But God treasures women just as much as He does men.
Yes, He does.
Okay, I got to stay in good with you. Anyway, then he asked about all the flocks that Jacob had sent ahead. Remember from last week, he sent several groups ahead with sheep and goats and donkeys and camels, and sent them in three different groups. And he told the herdsmen that went with them, be sure and tell Esau these are a gift from Jacob. And he explains to him, listen, those are gifts that I've sent. God's blessed me. I've got huge flocks, so those are gifts. And Esau says, oh, I've got more than enough. I don't really need them, but Jacob insists on it. So, of course, Esau decides to keep them. And then he offers to lead the way for Joseph. And Joseph says, well, you know, I've got young children, and we've also got young lambs and goats and so forth. And we have to travel at a much slower rate. And Esau said, well, how about if I just leave some of my men with you to help, to protect you? And Jacob even refuses that. Maybe he's a little concerned because, Esau apparently is not really a godly man. As we read on, he was not a real follower of God. And possibly he's a little concerned about having some ungodly men around his family, with wives and daughters and so forth. And maybe he's not too sure about these guys. Maybe they're a little rough looking or something. I don't know. But anyway, he says we're good. God will watch over us. So anyway, chapter Jacob ends up at Shechem, where he buys a plot of land from Hamor, the father of Shechem. This place was called Shechem, but there's also a man here named Shechem, which is the son of Hamor. So whether Shechem was named after this Shechem or maybe another Shechem in his ancestry, because a lot of times they would name, children or grandchildren after parents or grandparents. So possibly Shechem was named after this Shechem's grandfather or something. We don't know for sure. But anyway, he's in this city of Shechem, where there's apparently the head man is called Hamor, and his son is called Shechem, the same as the city. So it leads us right into chapter 34, where we see some misadventures of Shechem. It says, now Dinah, the daughter Leah had born to Jacob, went out to visit the women of the land. When Shechem, son of Hamor the Hivite, the ruler of that area, saw her, he took her and raped her. His heart was drawn to Dinah, daughter of Jacob. He loved the young woman and spoke tenderly to her. And then he said to his father, get this woman as my wife. Now, first of all, it takes a lot of audacity to want, expect a woman to marry you after you've raped her. That's kind of audacious. But anyway, it doesn't say why Dinah went out to visit the women of this area. Maybe she just wanted to see how they dressed. Could have been sociable. I mean, all we've seen so far is a bunch of brothers. This is the only daughter is listed. Maybe she's getting tired of being around a bunch of boys. We don't know.
Women are drawn together.
But whatever the reason, it landed her in trouble. And how she got in a situation where Shechem was able to rape her, we don't know all the details. But it's just a warning. There's no excuse for a man forcing himself on a woman under any circumstances. But as women, sometimes you need to use wisdom, not putting yourself in situations where that sort of thing is more apt to happen.
Putting yourself in harm's way.
Right, putting yourself in harm's way. Use wisdom and not hang around with the wrong kind of people, not do things that would give people the wrong idea and so forth. So, but again, that's not making excuses for what Shechem did. Anytime a man forced himself, no matter what excuse he uses, that's not God's God's plan, and that's no excuse. So, whatever. Apparently, these people are not as principled as the ones that Abraham and Isaac were living among before, like the Egyptians and those that were under Abimelech's direction, because even though they told everybody, well, this is our sister, this is my sister, not my wife, they were not molested or raped. They did, in one case, try to take them into their harem, but it was not a forced situation. And but apparently Shechem didn't have the same scruples, but at least he was willing to marry her afterwards. He said, I kind of like her. After he's raped her, he's decided that he wants her as his wife. And whether, of course, I don't know, it doesn't say what Dinah's feelings in this situation is. Again, I kind of have a hard time imagining that a woman would want to marry a man that had raped her if they have that kind of don't have more control than that. It's hard to believe they're going to be faithful to him later on. But anyway, whatever the situation there, Dinah's brothers, the 11 brothers, they're shocked and furious. It says they're very unhappy about this.
Now, Dinah is the victim in this situation.
Right? Yeah.
She's not.
Yeah, I'm not trying to make her look like she brought it on herself. Like I said, there's no excuse for a man doing this. She's definitely the victim. Well, yeah. I'm not trying to put the blame on her because we don't know. I mean, we don't know what the situation was, but she definitely was the victim in this situation.
Yeah.
And her brothers, like I say, they're ready to do something. It's funny, you in your own family, you quite often pick on your brothers or sisters. In our family, just boys, and my two older brothers picked on me, and I picked on my little brother. But let me tell you what, somebody outside the family do something, why, we was right there to do warfare. We was there to fight. It's all right for me to pick on him, but you leave him alone. He's my brother. And this was the case here. These brothers, they probably teased Dinah a lot, but when this happened to them, they're ready to go to war. They're united together. Yeah. So Hamor, Shechem's father, he sees all the great wealth of Jacob. He sees the blessings that God's put upon him. Whether he recognizes that God's blessing or not, we don't know. But he does see that Jacob is a blessed man, and so he sees a chance to take advantage of it. Let my son marry your daughter. In fact, let all your daughters intermarry with our men, and let your men, your sons, intermarry with our daughters. And there was an ulterior motive in this. In fact, he says, where is it? If we do this, when he's talking to the men later on, the men of Shechem, he says, if we do this, all their livestock and possessions will eventually become ours. So they're thinking if we intermarry with them, we'll wind up with all their prosperity. Yeah. Well, Dinah's brothers, they're not about to let this marriage take place because of the fact that his son, Hamor's son, Shechem, brought disgrace upon her. But apparently they got some deviousness, some deception. That's from deception from their deceptive ways from their father. Because they say, well, we'll let you marry Dinah, let your son Shechem marry Dinah, and we'll intermarry with you, you know, on one condition. Y'all have to be circumcised. I mean, that's our covenant with God, you know. We're all circumcised, so we, you know, if you all get circumcised, why we'll do that. Well, they're so intent on for Shechem wanting to marry Dinah and the others wanting to get, you know, bring these people in with them so they can inherit some of their wealth, that they're willing to do this. They, well, yeah, we'll do that, you know. That's a small concession to wind up with getting some of their wealth. And so the men all agree, and they all get circumcised at the same time. Well, that's a painful operation. In those days, they didn't have anesthetics, and they didn't have pain relievers, and they didn't have all the things that we have today. And, you know, you're talking about mostly adult males that there's a lot of pain associated with that. You know, it's not a pain-free procedure. And 3 days afterwards, they're all in a great deal of pain. And of course, they're not expecting any treachery. They're thinking, oh, these guys, they like us, you know, they're favorable to this. They want to intermarry with us and whatnot. And so they're not looking for any treachery on their part. So it says that two of Jacob's sons is Simeon and Levi. They were Dinah's full brothers. As you know, they weren't all full brothers and sisters because there's 4 different mothers involved. But anyway, they go in and slaughter all the men. You know, again, like I say, they're in pain and they're not expecting anything like this. So these 2 guys go in there and they just wind up slaughtering all the men. And then the other brothers come along and they just plunder the place. They take all the possessions, all the livestock, all the wealth, and even the women and children, and just really sack the whole town. And this, you know, certainly Shechem was in the wrong. There's no doubt about that. He had no right taking advantage of Dinah, but Jacob's sons, even more so, I believe. First of all, they're supposed to be the godly ones. You know, they're the ones that are followers of God, and yet they're the ones that go in and take vengeance. And then second of all, they take their anger, their vengeance out on the whole city. You know, and not just Shechem and his father, but the whole city. And they wind up plundering. And of course, you know, God says, vengeance is mine. And but they take vengeance themselves. And that's, I don't believe this is how God intended this to come about.
Vengeance is never God's will.
No, not. I mean, God may bring vengeance on people, but it's not our place.
Vengeance is mine, saith the Lord. I will
repay.
So you don't be doing that.
we don't have to do it ourselves. You know, because one person sins against you doesn't give you the right to sin against them. You know, what's the expression? 2 rights or 2 wrongs don't make a right. So anyway, they're as guilty, or if not more, than Shechem, guilty of disobeying God. And now Jacob, he's afraid that other people there are going to gather against him. You know, when they hear about what his sons have done, that they're going to come and they're going to take revenge for what his sons did. You know, how dare you wipe out a whole town and plunder it, you know, just because of this one incident. So Jacob's very upset with his sons, and he's fearful now. So we go on from there into chapter 35, where God tells Jacob to go back to Bethel. And build an altar there.
That's the place.
Go ahead.
That's the place where God met with Jacob.
That's right. Beginning. Yeah, that's where Jacob had the dream, with a ladder or stairs, whichever, the angels going up and down and descending it, and
And sometimes we get ourselves in such a fix, you know, such a some kind of a misdeed that we forget where we started.
Mm-hmm.
God has to remind us, okay, it's back to your roots.
Yeah.
Back to the place where we started.
We heard
Get
a message
yourself-
on that
Yeah,
a couple months ago, going back to, was it Bethel or no, maybe
Rama?
it might have been, yeah, because it wasn't talking about Jacob, it's talking about the Israelites when they
Yeah.
went back to where they
Back to
originally
where we began.
built the
That's-
altar, had the
Back-
altar.
Remember the
But in
first,
this case, it's going back to Bethel, back where God met with Jacob. This is a place where Jacob made God a promise.
right,
He said, these are his words from back when he first was at Bethel. He said, if God will be with me and protect me on this journey, and if he'll provide me with food and clothing, and if I return safely to my father's home, then the Lord will certainly be my God. And this memorial pillar I've set up will become a place for worshiping God. And I will present to God a tenth of everything he gives us. So I believe that God, in sending Jacob back to Bethel, was reminding him of that promise. First of all, the promises God made to him, but also the promises he made to God, saying that, you know, if you'll take care of me, you'll be my God. I'll serve you, and I'll give a tenth of everything I have, and I will come to worship at this place. And God's kept his end of the bargain. He brought him safely back to his father's home, and he's provided him not only with food and clothing, but he's provided him with a huge flocks and a huge family. God's taken good care of him. So he's, like say, probably God reminding Jacob of the promise that he made, and showing him how much he's kept his end. God's kept his end of the bargain. And anyway, in verse 3, I have a note here. Read the word, Jacob's words in verse 3. It says, then come, let us go up to Bethel, where I'll build an altar to God, who answered me in the day of my distress, and who's been with me wherever I've gone. So he's aware now that God's been with him all this time. Sometimes we tend to forget that, you know, in the busyness of our day and everything, we forget God promises to be with us always, and sometimes we miss the hand of God moving in our lives when we're so occupied with everyday things. But we need to remind ourselves on a regular basis, you know, of how much God is taking care of us, is watching over us. And he tells them to get rid of their pagan gods. And I'm thinking, what are they doing with pagan gods? This is supposed to be a godly outfit. But, you know, again, it just shows that these people were not perfect. God uses imperfect people. You know, I'm thinking, why has Jacob allowed pagan idols among his family? He says, get rid of them, purify yourself. We're going to build an altar to God. The God that Jacob now realizes has been with him all this time, has protected him with his time with Laban, has caused him to prosper, has caused him to have a big family, and he's just being reminded of all these things. So Jacob winds up burying all these idols. We need to get rid of our sins.
Get rid of the idols in our life.
Get rid of the idols in our life. Get rid of those things. And the idols in our lives aren't necessarily little statues or carved objects, but there are things in our life that get in the way of serving God fully. Things that we put ahead of God. It could be money. It could be our job. It could be any number of things. You know, people idolize sports figures, they idolize musicians or actors and actresses, all sorts of things. And again, there's nothing wrong with enjoying those things, but when they take first place in our life, then they're idols. And
so really what he's saying is you need to get your priorities straight.
Yeah, get rid of those things that are taking the place of God.
Yeah.
That keep you from putting God in first place.
Yeah.
If you have to, bury him, get rid of him.
Or make an attitude adjustment or something there.
Yeah. But when we do what God tells us to do, which he did there, he buried the idols, he told them to purify them. When we obey God, he protects us. Because as I said just a minute ago, why Jacob was afraid of all of the repercussions of what happened, or what his sons did, what the other people around there were likely to do. What says that God put caused fear to spread over all the people there in that area, so they were afraid to attack him. I think that was okay, I'm trying to find that right now. Anyway, that God did cause fear to come upon all the other people around there. They saw that God was with him, and
is that it?
35:5?
35:5, is that it? No?
Okay, no, it's not there, but it's somewhere in there. It says that he caused all the people to be afraid of him.
Okay. Well.
Then we see.
So here they are at Bethel.
Okay, yeah, we're at Bethel. Kind of lost my place here, so I'm trying to catch up here.
Bethel means house of God. There are a lot of churches. There's a whole denomination that is Bethel.
All right, well, let's go down to verse 8 here. Like I say, I kind of lost my place there, but and it says, now Deborah, Rebekah's servant, this was, of course, Rebekah was Jacob's mother, and Deborah was her nurse as she died, and she was buried there outside of Bethel. And then God appears to him again. And God says to him, your name is Jacob, but you'll no longer be called Jacob. Your name will be called Israel. God had actually spoken to him, or spoken this to him once before when he had the time when he wrestled with God. God told him then, your name's no longer Jacob, but it'll be Israel, which means God fights. And so it's God's reminding him of this. Your name now is not Jacob anymore, but it's Israel. And then tells him again that he'll become a great nation, even many nations, that kings will be among his descendants. And he reaffirms his commitment to give Jacob's offspring the land that they live in, just as he had promised to Abraham and Isaac before.
He's so faithful.
And that's true. He is faithful. He doesn't forget his promises.
No,
even, again, as we've said before, even when we're unfaithful, even when we don't live up to everything that God expects of us, he's still faithful to his promise. And he says, I'm going to give you this land. And it's a reaffirmation of what God had told him. And so he sets up an altar there and worships God. And he calls that place where God had talked with him Bethel. So they move on there and they head to what's called Ephrath at that time, which is later becomes Bethlehem. And now Rachel, she's pregnant with her second child. Remember, she's the mother of Joseph. But now she's pregnant a second time. She goes into labor. She has a very difficult labor and actually dies from the labor. Dies from her being during childbirth.
You remember what she said to her husband after she had her first son? She said, "Give me a child lest I die."
Well, before she had her first son, she wasn't able to have. She said, "Give me children or I die."
Or I die.
But also Jacob, I'm going way back. Jacob made the remark when Laban accused him of stealing his household gods. He said, whoever stole them, let them die.
Yeah.
And of course, Rachel was the one that stole them. They never
Right.
did find them, but
So,
he made that pledge, and so whether these things have anything to do with it or not, I don't know, but it's possible.
Words have
Sometimes,
power.
yeah, words have power, so we need to be careful about what we say, making rash promises or rash vows or whatever.
Statements, yeah.
But anyway, Rachel does die during or shortly after childbirth, because she lived long enough to name her son. She calls him Benoni, which means son of my sorrow.
Yeah.
But Jacob renames him and calls him Benjamin, which is son of my right hand. Maybe he doesn't want to be remembered of the sorrow, reminded of the sorrow every time he calls his son, instead of saying son of my sorrow, he says son of my right hand.
That's very interesting, because the right hand of a person is a place of prominence, like we're
Right.
seated at the right hand of God.
It's considered a place of strength and prominence. Yeah.
Which it says in Ephesians, we're seated with Christ at the right hand
At
of
the
God.
right hand of God, yeah. And of course,
It's a
most
good
people
place
are
to be.
right-handed, and so that's why it's considered a hand of strength. And
Yeah.
But then we read about a couple little incidents here that again shows that these people are not perfect. Talks about Reuben, which is his oldest son. Goes in and sleeps with one of his dad's concubines, Bilhah, who was Rachel's maid.
Yeah.
And actually, she was the mother of two of his half-brothers, his father's concubine, which, was totally out of line. But again, we see these people are not perfect.
No.
They did a lot of, can we say stupid things? A lot of not very good things. But God keeps his promises anyway. And then it goes down and lists the 12 sons, which become the 12 tribes of Israel. The sons of Leah is Reuben, the firstborn, Simeon, Levi, Judah, Issachar, and Zebulun. Those 6 are the sons of Leah. Then the sons of Rachel are Joseph and Benjamin.
Yeah.
Then the sons of Rachel's servant, Bilhah, are Dan and Naphtali. And then the sons of Leah's servant, Zilpah, are Gad and Asher. These were the sons of Jacob who were born to him in Padan Aram. Well, most of them were born in Padan Aram. Actually, Benjamin was born afterwards. And when he ends up the chapter, Jacob returns back to his father Isaac. Isaac is still alive, and he's living near Kiriath Arba, which that is Hebron, where Abraham and Isaac had stayed. Isaac lived 180 years, and he breathed his last and died and was gathered to his people.
Wow.
Old and full of years. And his son Esau and Jacob buried him. So they came together again to bury him.
That's a sweet way to pass on from this world to the next. Just lay down, pick up your feet, and off you go to heaven.
Go off to heaven, yeah.
No sickness or distress or all of that. Just lay down, pick up your feet.
He breathed his last and died, and was gathered to his people. And we'll just briefly, I'll finish with chapter 36, as I'm just going to briefly mention that, because it's just a genealogy of Esau.
And our time's about
And our time's about up, so we'll just mention that, and we'll start next week on chapter 37. But even though Esau wasn't in the chosen line, he was a descendant of Abraham and Isaac, and God blessed him. Blessed him with many children. He blessed him. There was a lot of kings, a number of kings that's listed in this chapter that were his children. He blessed him with material wealth too, because it said that between Jacob and Esau, they had so many flocks, they couldn't live close together because there wasn't enough pasture land. So they had to move away from each other to be able to feed all their flocks. And you look at it from just a natural perspective, Esau in some ways did better than Jacob or Israel for many years. Esau founded the nation of Edom. Edom was a name that was given him. Edom means red, and because he took the red stew, gave his birthright up for the red stew, they nicknamed him Edom.
And you're going to see he was the father of all through the Old Testament.
We'll see the Edomites more. But while Jacob and his descendants were wandering in a land that they didn't own, and then wind up being slaves in Egypt. Esau's and his family are ruling a nation of Edom, and they're serving as kings in this nation. So they were prospering in a way that Israel wasn't prospering at that time. But it's not how you start, but it's how you end up. And prosperity, can be a sign of God's blessing, but not necessarily, because a lot of people that prosper materially that aren't prospering spiritually or any other way. So you can't look at a person's, financial status and decide from that alone whether they're godly or not. But you look more at what they do with that prosperity they have. What are they using it for? But that's all we'll talk about chapter 36, because that's mostly just, like say, a genealogy of Esau. So we'll wind up there and jump in next time on chapter 37, where we get to talking about Joseph. And his trials and tribulations and victories. So, all right. Well, let me pray real quick. Well, Father, we just thank you for your word. We thank you, Lord, for the faithfulness that you show in your word. Every time I read your word, Lord, I'm reminded of how faithful you are, Father. Even when I sometimes don't do all that I should, when I don't always measure up to the standard that you set for us, Father, but you're faithful to your word, Father, and I'm thankful for that, Father. And as we read these stories from the Old Testament, we see that faithfulness, Lord, how faithful you are to the promises that you gave to Abraham and Isaac and Jacob, Father, and the generations following that. And so we know, Lord, that we can trust you to be faithful to your word today, Lord. What you promised, you will deliver, Father. And we just pray a blessing on those that are watching, Lord, that this would just open up their hearts and their minds, Lord, to receive more from you, Father. And we praise you and thank you in the wonderful name of Jesus. Amen. All right. Well, join us again next week, and we'll tell you all about Joseph. Okay?
Yeah.